Welcome to the German Council on Foreign Relations, DGAP, and welcome to our Thursday morning briefing series. My name is Jan Stöckmann, and I'm head of the Director's Office here at DGAP, and it is my great pleasure to be chairing this morning's briefing. Today, we are looking at India and at Indian-German relations, as Chancellor Scholz and a delegation of cabinet ministers are traveling to New Delhi for the 7th edition of government consultations between the two countries. Over the past years, India has gone through an impressive transformation and is expected to become the world's third largest economy by 2030. Trade between Germany and India has steadily increased over the past years, and a recent Foreign Office paper published on the 16th of October calls India a democratic partner of Germany for stability and security. At the same time, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government has been criticized for its stance in Russia, purchasing Russian oil and undermining international sanctions. Following a meeting with Prime Minister Modi on Friday, Chancellor Scholz will participate in joint cabinet meetings, and on Saturday he will travel to Goa and visit German Navy ships currently at port there in the context of Germany's Indo-Pacific deployment. In other words, the trip will cover a range of issues, including trade, climate, and geopolitics, and hence the title of today's briefing. Now, to discuss these issues, I'm thrilled to introduce a stellar panel. First up will be Dr. Amrita Narika, who's a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. From 2014 to 2024, she was president of the German Institute for Global and Area Studies, GIGA, in Hamburg. And before that, from 2004 to 2014, professor of international political economy at the University of Cambridge. Her research focuses on international negotiation, WTO, multilateralism, and India's foreign policy and strategic thought. Thank you for joining us, Amrita. Next will be Dr. Garima Mohan, who is a senior fellow with the Indo-Pacific program at the German Marshall Fund, based in Brussels. She's a non-resident fellow also with the Global Public Policy Institute in Berlin, and previously was a non-resident fellow at Carnegie India, an Asian Forum for Global Governance fellow, and a 2017 Razina Young Fellow. Her research focuses on Europe-India ties, EU foreign policy in Asia, and security in the Indo-Pacific. I should mention that both Amrita and Garima hold bachelor degrees from the same college, Stevens College in New Delhi. And all of our panelists today have actually studied for their undergraduate in India. So we pay particular attention, of course, during the selection of panelists. Last, but certainly not least, our own Dr. Abdullah Fahimi, who is a research fellow at the Center for Climate and Foreign Policy at the German Council on Foreign Relations, DGAP. Before completing his PhD at Leuphana University in Lüneburg, which was funded by the Heinrich Böll Foundation, Abdullah lectured and worked for an NGO in Kabul in Afghanistan, and from 2011 to 2014, he worked for the government of Afghanistan. His research covers, inter alia, energy and climate policy issues with a geographical focus on India and China. I should mention that Abdullah, along with colleagues, published a recent paper towards an Indo-German green strategy partnership, which my colleagues, I think, will be happy to share in the chat and which I'm sure we'll pick up in the debate. Now, before we begin, just a few housekeeping announcements. We would like to remind everyone that this event is being recorded and will be uploaded subsequently. We will kick off our conversation on the panel with about 5 minutes of intro remarks each, and then open up for questions after about 30 minutes or so. If you'd like to ask a question during the Q&A, please raise your hand, and when invited to speak, keep your questions or comments relatively short so we can pick up as many as possible. Finally, just a word of thanks to my colleagues here at DGAP who support this series: Henning Hoff, Milan Nitsch, Joel Lever, Wiebke Evering, Helga Beck, and many others. And now, without much further ado, let me hand things over to you, Amrita, to help us make sense of these government consultations. India's economy, as I said, has been on the rise for years. Indian-German trade is close to its all-time high, and Chancellor Scholz is in town. What could be better? Where are things from your perspective?
Greetings from India, and thank you very much, Jan, for the invitation to this timely and important exchange. It is indeed an exciting time. I want to use my 5-6 minutes to do 3 things. First, I'll give you my take on the sticking points in the Indo-German relationship, which led it to underperform for years, despite the many reasons why this should have been a very close partnership. Second, I'll explain why I think things may be about to change. And third, I'll share a few caveats and where extra care should be exercised. And in Q&A, if you like, I'd be very happy to suggest where there could be more ambition inserted in future Indo-German cooperation. So 3 sets of points to start with. First, if you had asked me last year or the year before how I saw the Indo-German relationship, I would have said it is one where there is Luft nach oben. It's a good relationship, but one that does not fulfill its real potential. Compare it especially against the warmth in the Indo-French partnership, for example, and the contrast was striking. And amongst the sticking points, 3 issues stood out. First, for all the talk of working with India at an eye-to-eye level, as we love to say in Germany, Germany did not seem to walk the talk. Frequent sniping from Germany on questions of values and raising eyebrows on the state of Indian democracy, even only a few months ago on the matter of Mr. Kejriwal's arrest, for instance, did not help the relationship. Second, India's reluctance to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine disappointed Germany, and German disappointment on this issue in turn disappointed the Indians. And third, unlike the Indo-French relationship that includes a robust component of defense cooperation, Germany's historic hesitation to engage on this issue was another deterrent to deepening cooperation between the 2 countries. This reluctance on the part of Germany was serious for India, given its difficult immediate neighborhood and its broader region at large. But things may be about to change, which brings me to the second part of my argument. The Focus on India paper adopted by the German federal government last week reflects the changes that are underway in Germany. First, the paper acknowledges resounding appreciation for Indian democracy. Chapter 1 is in fact entitled India, a Democratic Partner of Germany for Stability and Security. Its comment on the 2024 Indian elections is an unambiguous statement of support. And instead of the usual lecturing on values to India, the paper recognizes that the 2 countries have values in common, which both seek to preserve. Values sometimes under challenge in both countries, but they seek to preserve. Second, the paper does not shy away from recognizing the differences between India and Germany on Russia. But it moves beyond the old exhortations to India to rethink its position. Instead, it adopts a position that some, including myself, have been advising on for years, that Germany becomes a reliable security partner for India, which will also help reduce India's dependence on Russia for military supplies. And in this context, and also in the context of the Indo-Pacific and India's direct neighborhood, the paper is clear in addressing the third sticking point, defense cooperation. Is finally going to expand and deepen between India and Germany. I must add that the paper does well on other areas where Germany already cooperates with India as well, right? So from multilateralism and green energy to research and academia. It recognizes India's achievements, including on the G20 and the Solar Alliance, and it rightly acknowledges that Germany can learn from India too, rather than just the other way around. The language is strong. It's not just full of shoulds, but it also has wills. Germany will do this. If Germany takes this document as the basis of the intergovernmental consultations with India and beyond, I think we can be at least cautiously optimistic. Having said that, my third and final set of points, some caveats. Governments are not unitary actors, especially not in federal systems, which is the case in both India and Germany. So it will be very important to carry diverse constituencies with them. So let's see what comes out concretely from the intergovernmental consultations, but also how different actors are included in the conversation as it develops further, different actors from within the two countries. Public engagement and buy-in will be crucial for both these democracies. And my last and final point, while the document itself is impressive, there are a couple of places where I stopped short. One was with the references to the Global South as so-called, right? Where the Global South appears, it's preceded by the words so-called. Now, this dismissal of the Global South as a term and an entity has become very fashionable in the West, and especially so in some circles in Germany in my last years there. But in India and the some 125 countries that participate in the summit, there's nothing so-called about the Global South. And this is not just an issue of language, it has concrete policy implications. And I'm very happy to go into an exchange on this later too in Q&A, if you like. I'll stop there, Jan.
Thank you so much, Amrita. And indeed, we can come back to the terminology, which I know is controversial. But before I hand over to Garima, allow me just a quick follow-up question. You said that Germany was disappointed at India's reluctance to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that India, in turn, was disappointed by Germany's disappointment. I'd like you to explain to us and to our audience a little more how this second-degree disappointment on the part of India worked. So why and how was India disappointed at Germany's disappointment? How does that dynamic work?
Sure. And so German disappointment over this issue was understandable, right? Russia invades Ukraine, sovereignty of an independent nation is violated. That's understandable. But on the Indian, but we've seen this in other parts of the Global South too, but let me focus on India. For India, it was also very obvious why it's taking the position that it is in across different bodies, but also in its actions. For example, in the purchase of energy supplies, right? And the reasons why this was obvious to India was it's not going to condemn Russia because it does have a long-standing bilateral relationship with the country. B, it's not going to go into this very polarized, we're not going to invite Russia to anything. We won't engage in dialogue with Russia because it's got military dependence on Russia. And this military dependence matters very much because India is in a difficult neighborhood, right? And so alternatives are very important. Now, having said that, in a way, India is also very concerned about China, right? And the closer Russia and China come together as part of this isolation strategy coming from the West, the more risky it is for India to be entirely dependent on Russia. And so the most obvious answer to the problems, the disappointment from both sides actually was, let's try and reduce some of India's reliance on Russia, give India alternatives, right? And this would help India, and this would help Europe, this would help member states, including Germany. And this is why I think this document is so important. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much, Amrita. And this actually brings us to Garima's points. The Focus on India report that we mentioned in the beginning actually talks about joint military trainings and logistical support, but also weapons to reduce the dependence of India on Russia in this realm. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about military and geopolitical affairs in this whole relationship. Over to you, Garima.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jan. Great pleasure to be with all of you this morning. I'm also writing a paper for DGAP with your colleague Henning Hoff, that should come out soon enough, exactly on the strategy. Talking from the geopolitical perspective, let me delve right into the Russia question and complement what Amrita mentioned. So for Europe, Russia is the aggressor. For India, China is the aggressor. We've seen a very sort of hot simmering border conflict between India and China. We have seen some negotiations bring positive results, but this is the key security challenge for India. And if you look at the map of South Asia and broader map of Asia in general, a Russia-China alliance would be very detrimental to Indian interests. This has happened in the past in 1962 when India and China went to war. Moscow sided with Beijing, tipping the scales firmly in China's favor. So while the European strategy is to isolate Russia, for India that is a bad option because that drives Moscow to be a junior partner to Beijing. India wants to avoid that. And that is the sort of conversation you need to have with countries in other parts of the world who have a different strategic calculus. And I'm very glad that this Focus on India paper sort of tries to take that approach rather than the approach of Europe lecturing the rest of the world how they should see this conflict. Coming to the geopolitical dynamics, I have to say, while Germany's China policy might be lagging a little behind its European counterparts, its Indo-Pacific understanding and the understanding of the role that China plays as an assertive, often aggressive actor in the region is on point, which is why we've seen the end of a Merkel-era policy focusing solely on China in Asia to the current government with Chancellor Scholz choosing to visit Japan as the first country when he took office in Asia. Back in the day, it always used to be China. Both Chancellor Scholz and Minister Baerbock have had several visits to India, very close consultations with the Indian foreign minister. And I think that really reflects in this paper, which understands the Indian side very much. So the first section of the paper says that Germany and India have finally converging worldviews, and they have similar key interests, similar understanding of international politics, which is clear because it sees India as a democratic counterpart to China. And understands that the Indo-Pacific theater dynamics, what's happening there, will have an impact on the Euro-Atlantic theater as well. For me, it's very interesting to see security cooperation because the paper clearly says India has diverging views on Russia, but we understand this actually creates the need for more dialogue and not less. And even with the Russia question, we still have common interests. This is in fact a common thread across all European member states and the EU. A lot of people expected the relations with India to tank after Ukraine. The opposite, in fact, has happened, and it's a positive development. So Germany now finally is saying that we want India to reduce dependence on Russia in arms, and we are happy to work with Indian companies in terms of co-manufacturing, co-development of platforms in India, make the export control regime more reliable. That has been a niggling point between India and Germany. Let me give you an example. The CIPRI report says that the share of Russian arms imports to India has declined by almost 45% in the last 10 years. So this diversification that India is doing didn't happen after Ukraine. It's been going on for a long time. And the share of French imports have increased by almost 400% in the last 10. That really shows you that India is looking westwards when it comes to high technology, more modern weapons platforms, and is trying to reduce dependence on Russia. And I argue that any strategic partnership with India wouldn't work if you don't have the security element. So I'm happy to see that Germany is now doing that as well. In addition, there's also elements of increasing interoperability between armed forces. Germany participated in a multilateral Air Force exercise, which India hosted recently. They are negotiating a logistics support agreement, which India has with all its most important partners like Japan, Australia, the United States. And I think, yeah, the Baden-Württemberg frigate is going to dock in India, also the combat ship Frankfurt am Main. So I think it's this increasing cooperation between your armed forces, talks of interoperability, really sort of positions Germany as an actor that sees what's happening in Indo-Pacific and how to work with like-minded partners on these questions. I'll just complement what Amrita said from the Indian perspective a little bit. So Germany is reaching out to India, but India has also completely changed its policy towards Europe in the last decade or so. We at GMF have been mapping Indian high-level engagements with Europe, and you would see that It's a completely new outlook. The way India engages the EU, the Nordic states, Central and Eastern European countries. Prime Minister Modi was the first prime minister to visit Ukraine ever in Indian history. First visit to Poland in 47 years, signing a strategic partnership agreement with these countries, opening an embassy in Lithuania. India is really looking westwards, particularly towards Europe, for 4 key things. Number one is high-tech partnership on technology and innovation. Second, on, of course, trade and investments. It is turning westwards when it comes to its trade partners and looking for investments from Europe. Third, on migration and mobility. Again, it's a big ask from Germany to have more skilled labor from India coming into Germany. There's also provisions about that in this paper. And fourth is security and defense. So a lot of the arc of Indian foreign policy on a lot of these issues, the most important partners for India, they are in the West now. The United States is the most important strategic partnership, and the partnership with Europe is also expanding remarkably well. So all of these 4 areas that I mentioned will be covered in the intergovernmental consultations, and the Summit for German Businesses, the 18th, will also take place in India, which is also a good sign, because we know, I mean, the biggest impediment to Germany's China policy is often companies who have big investments in China. And the paper interestingly says that it hopes to change the perception of India among German businesses. And so I think this event will also be key for them to see what India has to offer. The Indian foreign minister said that they are putting in place measures for doing ease of business in India, definitely attracting investment, particularly electronics manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing in India. So I think there is also an openness from the Indian side that has led to this paper. It is not simply just Germany thinking that change is coming, but definitely a receptiveness from the Indian side, a very sort of forward-leaning approach to Europe. And I have to say, when the Ukraine invasion happened, a lot of ministers and dignitaries from Europe, Germany went to Delhi, and Delhi was quite open about its constraints. So I think that's also a reason why this is often more of an issue in media and other circles, and people who do policy with India understand where India's constraints are.
You said that India is looking to diversify, especially when it comes to military affairs, but I've also read about a strategic partnership between Russia and India coming out of the BRICS summit. So perhaps you could say a few words about how to reconcile both those approaches.
Yeah. Well, India has had a strategic partnership with Russia for very many years. What India does is that it definitely participates in BRICS. It is a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There is even a Russia, India, China trilateral. But I often see a lot of hand-wringing and tensions in Europe about why is India participating in these formats, and India plays a very different role in all of these formats. For example, the Quad with the US, Australia, Japan is the most important diplomatic platform for India. The role that it plays in BRICS is that of balancing the role that Russia is playing and China is playing. You see with the BRICS expansion that was pushed by the Chinese, it was India and Brazil that had qualms in the beginning and were trying to make sure that this is not turning into an anti-Western platform. In the G20, India said that it is a bridge between partners in the West and those in the global South. And I think this is the role that it plays even in formats like the BRICS. So it is not that, it is interesting to see how does India reconcile a very, very close partnership with the United States, Japan, Australia, with participating in BRICS, but I think it has very different roles that it plays in all of these different summits. And of course, this one was important because India and China just finally negotiated 2 important sectors of the border, which were which were seeing a lot of tensions and militarized areas. Finally, we've seen some light emerging on those. So it is important to use these platforms as well. Hope that answers your question.
It does. It does. I was just keeping an eye on the participants in the room and seeing if my colleague Abdullah made it back in the room, which he seems to have not done so far. So let me ask one more follow-up question on the panel and then open things up in the Q&A, and we'll bring in Abdullah as soon as he makes it back. Amrita, in your opening remarks, you said that all this lecturing of the global north towards the global south has had a long history, and that indeed Germany can learn a lot from India. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little more about this direction of the relationship and a couple of examples of what Chancellor Scholz and the cabinet might learn on their trip to India this week.
Sure. So we tend to focus very much on the Western agenda, on a Northern agenda when we think about bilateral negotiations. But let's look at the G20 summit, right, under the Indian presidency. And under Prime Minister Modi's leadership, India has advanced the concept of lifestyle for the environment. This is a really important way. It's a different way to think about protecting the environment, issues of sustainability, because, you know, we have talk and we have efforts, right, to have human-centric development. That's not new. But what this concept is, it's about planet-centric development. It's not only about humans, right? It's a non-anthropocentric view of the world. Now, that doesn't mean that every aspect of India's politics and economy is non-anthropocentric. It's not. But there are traditional ideas within India that Prime Minister Modi is drawing on, and he's putting them also on the global table to point out that you can have a vision of global order that gives rights to other species, that gives rights to nature. Now, these are just seeds of an idea in that life concept. But these can be picked up on when we think about sustainability, when we think about climate change, when we think about biodiversity, when we think about human rights, right? So human rights in the Western sense are human rights, and we're often lectured, we hear lectures about, human rights are relative, you know, it's not universal. There's a different Asian concept of human rights, which is much more family-based. But India's concept of human rights is different. It's not just family-based. They're not only human. In India, human rights are not human only, right? In parts of Indian philosophy, which are living even today, right? So these types of ideas are where both India and Germany can come together and have animal welfare, animal rights built in. You know, we have problems of factory farming in Germany. We also have problems of animal rights in India. The two can help develop this further, and this has implications for the environment and sustainability and climate change. That's
Wonderful.
An example.
Thank you so much for this tangible example indeed. And actually, this brings us back to the climate aspect, and I'm glad that Abdullah is back in the room. Abdullah, can you see us and hear us, and are you ready for your remarks?
I would like to thank both Amrita and Garima for their remarks, because this makes my job easier, as this really provides the context in which you can understand the developments in the climate and energy discussions better, the Indo-German climate and energy partnerships. Amrita said that we are now seeing a change in the Indo-German relations. In the climate and energy discussions, I would say the big change has already happened or taken place, and this was, I would say, after the sixth intergovernmental consultation rounds in 2022, in which both governments agreed on a partnership for green and sustainable development. That is the major partnership in the climate and energy sphere, and also in the latest Focus on India paper, the German government clearly states that all our efforts in the energy and climate discussions will take place within the framework of the Partnership for Green and Sustainable Development that was concluded in 2022. But I would like to say that this is not the only or the first partnership between the two countries. This partnership goes back a long way. It goes back to 2006 when the two countries agreed to set up the India-Germany Energy Forum, and since then there have been many steps taken to strengthen this partnership, and this has included, for example, in 2015, they agreed on an Indo-German solar energy partnership, for which Germany allocated a huge sum of money. And also later in 2019, the two countries concluded the Indo-German Green Urban Mobility Partnership for urban areas and cities. And of course, as I was saying, the major step came in 2022 when with the agreement on partnership for green and sustainable development, but it had several elements. One was, for example, the setting up of an Indo-German green hydrogen task force, which has been set up. But because this area, the source of energy, hydrogen, is being discussed for, let's say now, maximum 10 years. I mean, seriously discussed for 10 years now. It's not as old as the other sources of energy. There's still room, a lot of room to do more. And within the Partnership for Green and Sustainable Development, there were also elements on renewable energy partnership, on agroecology and sustainable management of natural resources. And then in 2023, there was also a paper that the two countries agreed on, which was the India-Germany vision to enhance cooperation in innovation and technology. And the latest paper is the Focus on India paper, which the German government released in the lead up to the 7th intergovernmental consultation rounds now taking place in New Delhi. In this paper also, the German government in this strategy paper says that we are working in also with India in multilateral fora, in bilateral settings, of course, also, and to implement the goals of the Paris Agreement, but also the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. Here it is maybe worth to mention also the different foreign policy priorities when it comes to climate for both countries. So in our study that we carried out a few months ago, we tried to identify the foreign policy priorities for both India and Germany when it comes to climate and energy. And for India, it seems to be, Amrita was also talking about sticking points, and maybe we come back to this later when it comes to climate and climate discussions, but there are overlaps. There are overlaps in terms of foreign policy strategies on climate. For Germany, it's we identified looking at different strategic documents of the German government, including the major document released during COP last year, COP28, the climate foreign policy strategy of the German government. So the foreign policy priorities for Germany are just sustainability transitions first. Second, accelerated and concerted decarbonization. Third, economic opportunities and green industrial policy. And lastly, also security of energy supply for Germany. These are the priorities for Germany. And when it comes to India, the priorities are climate finance, prioritizing energy access while decarbonizing, and also green industrialization. And here you see the overlaps in terms of climate finance. India is trying to secure more finance for its transition away from fossil fuels, although here is one of the sticking points that I would like to come back later if there is time, although it doesn't use the terminology of coal phase out or transitioning away of fossil fuels. but it uses using other terminology. It does point to the decarbonization agenda in general, and then and the green economy is also something that both countries are trying to transform their economies such that they are more green, and for this they are now also putting a lot of effort and investing a lot in green hydrogen, both Germany and India.
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt, Abdullah. We need to move on slowly, but I want to give you a chance to complete the point you're just making by asking a quick follow-up question. You mentioned a whole lot of strategy papers and task forces and so on. But if I were a journalist now asking critical questions to the German and Indian government in New Delhi these days, I would ask for tangible results and numbers and precise projections of actual reductions of carbon emissions, etc. So perhaps you could give us some data of how promising developments really are.
Well, to put all of these into perspective and to see the global agenda to reduce CO2 emissions, we should say that Germany is reducing its CO2 emissions since 1979, and since 1990 also, when we have even more precise data. But India, I mean, also based on its based on the principle agreed upon in the Paris Agreement, common but differentiated responsibility, India says we can, and this principle also allows India to increase its emissions, but India also needs to at some point peak emissions and also reduce emissions. And India's target for net zero economy is 2070, and if you compare that to Germany, it's 2045. And India's emissions, if coming to data, India's emissions are growing every year, but there is pressure to reduce emissions and to reduce coal use in India.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Abdullah. I want to hear from Garima and Amrita as well on this issue, and I do want to bring in questions from the audience. There is one question by Aju John who's asking about bilateral migration agreements, and you touched on this, Garima, in your remarks. Yeah. What are the aspects of state policy that are under negotiation, and how do they influence the choices of migrants in India and those of employers, recruiters, and universities in Germany? Let me also encourage everyone to raise your hands and ask questions in person, which is always more lively. But we're happy to pick them up from the chat as well. So perhaps you could pick this one up, Garima, and also feel free to react to what your co-panelists have said in the meantime.
So the Focus on India paper really talks about a new policy for attracting skilled migrants from India, which has been negotiated by several ministries in Germany. So this is already in place, and there's also ways of making the visa process easier, creating a new EU Blue Card Center in Kolkata, and all of these elements, which is really to attract migrants from India. From my personal experience, having lived in Berlin, it took me more than 1 year to get an appointment at the center, at the Ausländerbehörde. I mean, it's not called that now, but I think that makes a big difference in terms of how the receiving country welcomes highly skilled migrants from India, how easy the bureaucratic processes are. But I was heartened to see this sort of all ministerial, all of government approach to attracting more labor from India. Migrants from India, highly skilled ones, tend to go to English-speaking countries in the Anglosphere. Of course, after Brexit, the number of Indian students in Germany has increased. Currently, there are 43,000 Indian students studying in Germany. And if the pipeline from studying to contributing to economy and jobs is made easier, which I think the government is trying to do, that would make a huge difference.
What do you think, Amrita? Is there Luft nach oben in this field of migration as well?
Yes. Very much so. And I would say in both directions, right? Sort of also for Germans wanting to come and work in India, right? The process can be made easier, and very much so in the direction that's mentioned in the German paper that Garima highlighted, right? The bureaucracies of neither countries are easy to deal with. And the language barrier does not help when one is an immigrant coming to Germany. So yes, there is Lufthansa open, but these are steps in the right direction, right? If I may pick up on a point and add, support and add to what Garima said on the BRICS, right? Completely agree with all that she has said, and would add one more grouping to the ones that she named, which is IPSA, right? India, Brazil, South Africa. That is a group to watch as three democracies working together, three democracies from the global South. And this this BRICS summit was interesting, and India's role as a balancer, as Garima put it, to have a BRICS statement coming out, which it did, talking about reform of the UN, including Security Council, right, with a group that has 2 permanent members already. That's significant, right? That's interesting and significant. So the BRICS is interesting for a variety of reasons, but India's role in different groupings matters. And that's where the Global South entity, identity, and concept comes in, because India sees itself as a member of the Global South in many of these fora.
Thank you, Amrita. Does the do South relationships matter a lot in the field of climate and energy, Abdullah? Did you see anything coming out of BRICS in this regard?
Not particularly from the BRICS discussions, but yes, India has tried to present itself as the representative of Global South when it comes to climate discussions too. It stresses a lot on justice aspects of the green transitions and tries to be the voice of Global South when there are discussions on climate, and also this as I mentioned, the common but differentiated responsibility, meaning that the countries who have lesser historical emissions should have more time to transform their economies. So yes, and they do actually mention, India does mention working with Global South closely to also in trilateral settings, which can also be actually read in the Focus on India paper, where Germany also encourages trilateral dialogues where India, Germany, and other Global South countries can be put together to discuss and exchange in these settings.
Thanks a lot. I want to pick up a question by my colleague Tim Bosch. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for the great briefings. It's very helpful. My name is Tim Bosch. I'm a research fellow and colleague of Abdullah's at the Center for Climate and Foreign Policy here at DGAP as well. I wanted to follow up on the issue of trade, bilateral trade, and India's trade with the European Union in general. And link that to the question of climate, right? And was just wondering on your vision to what extent these could be linked, these two issues, and what potentials we also see. With the green transition, trade relationships and value chains are changing. We will see less dependence on fossil fuel exporters potentially, and more dependence on new critical raw materials and green products, and I think green value chains in general will span around the world. So currently, these are heavily dependent on China. Germany in particular depends heavily on China for its green transition, and I think if trade with China indeed came to a halt, it would pose enormous challenges for our green energy transition. So I was wondering to what extent you see potential for the India-German relationship to diversify green supply chains and reinforce trade specifically along green products and green value chains.
Thank you so much, Tim. Let me hand things over to Amrita first, and then Garima.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. That's a great point. And green partnership between India and Germany is going to be really important for this, right? And it's not just going to be government to government; it's going to be public-private partnerships. This is an area that a lot more effort needs to be going into this area, as also in areas relating to medicines, right? So active pharmaceutical ingredients in the medicines that we consume. China is, if China stopped supplying this, the whole world would be in big trouble, right? So we do need to be diversifying on this too. India has a very strong pharmaceutical sector, and it's been working actively in the WTO for decades on also ensuring access to medicines for members of the Global South, which we saw in the case of COVID diplomacy, right? Which we saw in the case of supplies of vaccines. So this is another area where Germany and India could work together. And as we're on the subject of trade, maybe I could add one more point, Jan, with your permission. And it is this: the paper talks about working together and preserving the WTO and preserving multilateralism. But both countries, both Germany and India, are very aware of the risks posed by geoeconomic considerations, right? By the fact that interdependence can be weaponized, right? And so supply chains need to be secure. India's argued, again, for many years for reasons of food security, right? Which we've seen, right? Because the system, for example, makes it very difficult to put up export controls, the existing multilateral system. Now we're beginning to see the same kinds of problems occurring on critical minerals, right? And, raw materials that will be needed for semiconductors. So this is what the two should be doing is maybe, perhaps they don't want to announce this, but this is the way they should be thinking and developing the conversation in a more ambitious direction, I said, right? They should be thinking about how you can secure those and realign supply chains, hopefully within the system of the WTO, but the WTO will then need to be fundamentally reformed, right? It's not going to look like the old WTO, right? And Europe in general is very nervous about having this conversation, and Geneva is a bit of a bubble. And the US is doing its own thing, right? Friendshoring and onshoring. And so Germany and India should be coming together and recognizing the problems. Now, India has been patently aware of these problems because it's next door to China, right? But it gets a lot of flack in the WTO right now for the positions that it takes. South Africa speaks up, India speaks up, right? And they get criticized a lot. Some of the points that they raise are valid, some are up for discussion, but Germany and India, I would say, should coordinate on this. And that non-anthropocentric, planet-friendly agenda, which links up to Tim's question too. Right? That could be linked up with trade as well.
Thank you. So the total trade of India and Germany is, I think, only 1/10 of what it is with China at the moment. But if I understand you correctly, it's not just about the volume of trade, but it's about the kind of trade, and it's about the security of certain trade routes. Over to you, Garima, if you want to add something to this question and this complex of questions.
I mean, Amrita's answer is very comprehensive. Just wanted to add that, the green supply chain conversation is already a part of India-Europe conversations. India has a green strategic partnership with Denmark, a blue strategic partnership with the Netherlands. The EU-India TTC is supposed to pick up on some of these questions, particularly solar. But CBAM, for example, is problematic. Sometimes the EU's priorities are not the world's priorities, and sort of pushing these policies on other countries does not go down well. CBAM is a case in point. FTA negotiations is flawed as an instrument fundamentally because it does not cover a lot of these new strategic areas and goes through this very bureaucratic, approach of dealing with countries. I mean, if the EU couldn't negotiate an FTA with Australia, what hope does, India have? I think so this needs to be fundamentally changed. Critical mineral partnership, perhaps with the EU would be interesting. for EU and India to explore. That could be interesting. European companies do often say that their consumers want a more green product, more sustainably produced product. So they do bring it up in discussions when they manufacture in India, for example, or do trade in India.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I want to give you a chance to react as well, Abdullah, in just a second. But since we are already coming sort of to the end of our time, I wanted to invite all of you in a way of closing remarks to answer this fun question. If you were to sit in the room with the Indian and German government today and tomorrow, what would be the sort of 2-3 key points that you would slip into the minister's speaking points, key pieces of advice or perhaps tactics in managing this particular relationship? So this is a chance for you to address something directly to the governments. But feel free to pick up the previous point as well, Abdullah. We'll go in reverse order, Abdullah, Garima, and then closing off with Amrita in the end.
Thank you very much, Tim. That's a good question to think about and to conclude. For myself and for climate discussions, it would be both countries want to increase their efforts on hydrogen, green hydrogen especially, and there is a lot of room for more to do, especially that this technology is new and the underpinnings and the legal frameworks for trade, use, and transport of hydrogen is still not yet fully developed. There is room that these two countries now take the initiative, take the lead to really define legal frameworks and for use, trade, and transport of hydrogen. That's one thing. And secondly, in terms of value chains, supply chains in green tech, especially. I think Tim's point is really. I hope it will be picked up because when you look at the numbers, it is really alarming how dominant China is in all of the green technologies. If you look at batteries, if you look at wind turbines, if you look at solar panels, China is dominating 95% and in some cases 99% of all of these technologies. And similar to the over-dependence on Russian gas, now the Western countries, including Germany, but also the US are waking up and seeing this over-dependence and the vulnerability that this means to them. And there is also now, fortunately for these countries, at least for Germany, there's in this latest paper, there is the mention there is a mention on supporting India or working with India so that India takes some share of the green supply chain for the green technologies, which is great news. I think I've also heard interest on American side that they want to take advantage of the really good workforce in India and shift some share of the green technology production from China to India.
Over to you, Garima.
I think the current state of the German-India partnership is a very welcome change from the lethargy we saw. And in the past, Germany and India have been strategic partners since 2000, and it's taken this long to have an actually strategic agenda in the partnership. My only recommendation would be to increase India expertise in Germany and vice versa. I mean, we were very fortunate to have Amrita as head of GIGA. We need more people who understand contemporary India. Investments in Indology history is a good thing, but Germany really needs to shift. It cannot be there only 1 or 2 people working in think tanks who covered this topic. We really need investments, maybe an India chair in Brussels that also helps build capacities of smaller member states, other member states who are interested in working in India. We've seen Americs for China. I think could be interesting to get something like that for India that would really broaden our horizons and put be helped in sustaining this momentum that we see in the German-India partnership today.
Thanks, Garima. Over to you, Amrita.
Thanks for emphasizing the research point, Garima. I completely agree. Academic cooperation, we need more of that. But if I were in the room, I think that's such a great question. I would say to both heads of government, please pay attention to the values question. Yeah, there's this tendency to emphasize interests over values sometimes, and sometimes the other way around, the lecturing on values. But the two are interlinked, they're reflexive. Values shape interests and vice versa. And these two democracies should be helping shape the world according to certain values, right? And those values, in my eyes, include that point about lifestyle for the environment, respect and dignity for other species, respect for the environment, respect for nature, right? Now, so there are indigenous ideas in India, but there are movements in Germany that support these ideas, right? And in Europe. So that's sort of one, sort of my slightly kooky idea that I would say. But I think it's really important because look at what we have done to biodiversity on this planet. And protection of individual animals within, or individual beings within those species is just as important. So that's one. And because I don't want them to think that I'm some sort of left-wing hippie. So instead, I will then also tell them about the importance of, if we want to do this diversification, this realignment of supply chains, the risk is that we are going to get fragmentation, right? Which neither Germany wants nor India wants, right? That's why we keep talking about multilateralism. But to do it within the system, we need to be having these conversations in Geneva, in the WTO, which we're not having, right? We're not really having. We're having a tiny bit about the clause on national security, but not much more, right? And so a lot of the action is happening outside. So if you don't want the WTO to break, then what you need to be able to do is to say, look, there are some real problems here and we're going to address them together. Let's take the violations of the rules or the spirit of the agreement seriously, right? And that includes considerations of national security, good old-fashioned national security.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's a powerful way to end. Let me thank all of our panelists for their brilliant remarks and the Q&A. We didn't get a chance to answer all questions. We did not talk about the terminology question of the Global South that Amrita mentioned in the beginning. And allow me to share in the chat a link to a recent article that came out in DGAP's house journal, Internationale Politik, on this question. So feel free to read this one up, as well as the paper shared by Abdullah. Feel free to follow our other events. Feel free to come back to future editions of this morning briefing series and other events. We will take a break next week, given it's the public school holidays in Berlin, and then come back with a special morning briefing on the morning after the US elections on the 6th of November. There'll be plenty to talk about as well. But for now, round of applause to our speakers and panelists, and thanks everyone in the audience. Goodbye and have a nice day. Bye-bye.